A German shepherd waits in the rain, eyes fixed on Officer Malik Bryant. At first, Malik thinks it's just a stray, until the dog follows him for 5 blocks without hesitation. When he kneels to check the collar, he finds a damp, torn note hidden beneath the leather. He's still in the dark. Just 5 words, but they hit like a punch. This isn't a lost pet, it's a call for help. And someone, somewhere, is still waiting. If stories like this speak to you, hit like and subscribe. Then drop a comment, where in the world are you watching from? The late autumn air in Eastfield carried that restless kind of stillness. The kind that settled over the streets just after rush hour, when the city hadn't yet decided if it wanted to fall asleep or wake up. Officer Malik Bryant stepped out of the precinct, his shoulders squared under the weight of 12 hours in uniform. 12 hours of noise, calls, and decisions. He was a tall man, broad across the chest, with skin the color of deep earth and eyes that rarely blinked when something didn't sit right. Tonight, though, he wasn't thinking like a cop. He was thinking like a tired man craving silence and maybe a warm meal. His boots struck the pavement with slow, steady rhythm, badge tucked under his jacket, hands stuffed in his coat pockets as he cut across Wilkins Avenue. The wind blew dry leaves against his shins, whispering around alley corners like secrets that didn't want to be heard. That's when he noticed the sound. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the shuffle of people or the buzz of city static. It was soft at first, like breath, second pair of footsteps. He turned his head slightly, just enough to glance over his shoulder, and saw a dog trailing behind him. A big one. German shepherd, black and brown coat speckled with dust, fur thick and tangled like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. Its ears were up, alert, but its posture was low and wary, like it had learned not to trust the world, and the world had proved it right. Malik frowned. "Go home," he muttered, not stopping, just tossing the words over his shoulder. The dog didn't flinch. If anything, it moved a few paces closer. Another block, then another, still behind him. Now Malik slowed, not because he was tired, but because something about the dog's persistence crawled under his skin. It wasn't begging, it wasn't barking, it was following, silent, steady, purposeful, as if it had chosen him. He finally stopped near the corner of Grant and 8th, next to a flickering lamppost casting fractured light over the sidewalk. He turned, his brows drawn tight, arms reach, tongue flicking across its muzzle, eyes locked on him. "You're your deal?" Malik muttered, kneeling slowly, letting his hands show cop instinct, even with animals. "You lost?" The dog didn't back up, it didn't growl, it just watched. Malik noticed the leather collar worn, cracked, with one half-torn tag hanging. He reached out slowly, palm up. The dog flinched, paused, then, like a soldier giving in, it stepped forward. Malik gently took hold of the collar. That's when he felt something tucked between the folds of old leather. A piece of paper, damp from the dog's fur but still intact. He unfolded it. His breath caught. Scrawled in what looked like a child's handwriting were 5 urgent words. "Help us. No food. Micah's sick. Apt 3F." The paper was creased and dirty, the ink blurred in places, but the message was unmistakable. Malik stared at it, the street lamp humming above, suddenly the only sound in the night. He flipped the note over. A second line, faint, almost erased, "If no one comes, run." His heart dropped. He looked at the dog, no, the shepherd again. It wasn't just following him. It had been looking for him, bringing him this, eating him. "Micah," Malik said aloud, reading the name again. He stood, folding the note carefully into his palm. The dog stepped back, watching his every move. "You brought me this," he whispered, voice barely audible. "You knew I'd stop." His eyes scanned the block, trying to piece it together. Apartment 3F. The address wasn't written, but Malik had a guess. There were only 3 buildings within 2 blocks with third-floor units, and only one with boarded windows and a reputation for incidents. The Kinsley Arms. Ranger, though he didn't yet have a name, let out a quiet whine, like a signal, and then started walking again. Malik followed. By the time they turned the corner onto the block with the Kinsley Arms, Malik's steps had changed. No longer tired, now quick, controlled. The cop had returned. But in his chest, something new was blooming, something he didn't often allow himself to feel. Not in this line of work. Hope? Tied with dread, he checked his radio but hesitated calling it in. Something about this felt personal now, like whoever wrote that note had chosen him with no backup, no fuss. Just him and a dog that knew how to find a man when no one else would listen. As they approached the building, the shepherd slowed and sat at the gate, looking up at him as if to say. Malik looked up at the crumbling facade, the flickering hallway light barely visible through cracked glass. Act 3. Whoever or whatever was waiting behind that door, he had to find out. He placed a hand on the shepherd's head. It didn't flinch this time. "Okay," he whispered, voice firm now. "Let's find Micah." Officer Malik Bryant's boots echoed against the cracked tile floor as he stepped into the Kinsley Arms apartment building, the heavy scent of mildew and old cigarettes immediately clinging to his skin. The fluorescent light above the stairwell flickered erratically, casting ghostly flashes down the narrow corridor. Ranger walked beside him, alert but calm, nose twitching, eyes scanning every move. They climbed in silence. On the third floor, apartment 3F sat wedged at the end of the hall, its door crooked in the frame, as if it had been kicked once and never quite repaired. Malik knocked firmly, voice level. "Police? Anyone inside?" No answer. He pressed his ear to the door, catching nothing but still air. The shepherd sniffed the base of the door and let out a short growl, tail rigid. Malik tried the knob. Locked. He stepped back, nodded to Ranger, and gave a single solid kick just left of the latch. The door burst open with a shudder. Inside, the air was thick with neglect. A mattress lay directly on the floor, surrounded by crushed cereal boxes, moldy diapers, and empty juice cartons. Flies buzzed lazily near the sink. The only light came from a single window half covered by a torn bedsheet. Ranger hesitated in the entryway, then padded across the filthy linoleum to the kitchen corner, where a tall, rust-colored cabinet stood wedged between the fridge and the wall. Without warning, the dog stiffened, growled, and lunged forward, placing himself between the cabinet and Malik, barking in sudden, sharp bursts. Malik's instincts kicked in. He unholstered his sidearm, stepping carefully toward the cabinet, his free hand out to calm the dog. "Easy, Ranger, what are you trying to show me?" The barking grew more urgent, deeper now, as if the dog were trying to force him to move faster. Malik slowly pulled open the cabinet doors. Behind a broken toaster, shoved awkwardly beneath some plastic bags, was a cell phone, old, scuffed, and powered off. He reached for it, pulling a spare battery pack from his kit. He managed to charge it just enough to force it on. The phone sputtered to life. No passcode. Just a blank screen with 3 apps and a low memory warning. Malik tapped into the gallery, and a single video sat at the top of the list, time-stamped 7 days prior. He pressed play. The image was grainy, captured from a low angle near the floor, likely a phone propped behind a couch. The lens faced the apartment's front door. A soft knock. Silence. Then the knob turned slowly. A man stepped inside, tall, broad, wearing a gray hoodie and a black neoprene mask that covered his face entirely. He carried a small duffel bag and moved with practiced, silent steps. He didn't call out. He didn't seem lost. He walked directly to the corner of the room, knelt down and placed the bag beneath the mattress. Then, with one final glance around, he left, locking the door behind him. Malik replayed it twice. The timestamp didn't match any dispatch logs from that day. No wellness checks, no neighbor calls, no landlord maintenance. The presence of that man, masked and deliberate, lit a fire in Malik's gut. This wasn't abandonment. This wasn't simple neglect. Someone had been here, and someone had expected to return. He turned toward Ranger, who now sat by the kitchen door, eyes locked on him like he was waiting for permission to move. Malik scanned the room again. A stained baby bottle sat on the edge of the counter. Crayon marks lined the lower third of the wall, erratic and shaky. A second-hand stroller leaned against the closet door. Every inch of this place screamed desperation, but none of it explained the man in the video. Malik opened the closet. Nothing. He flipped the mattress, dust and crumbs. No duffel bag. Either someone had retrieved it, or the children had never touched it. He moved through the rest of the apartment carefully. The bathroom held more filth than danger. But behind the toilet he spotted something strange. 4 small tally marks drawn in soap on the tile wall, like a child counting days. Malik snapped a photo. Then, remembering something, He walked out into the hallway and down the stairs to apartment 2F. He knocked. After a moment, a middle-aged woman cracked the door. Her eyes were wary, face tired. "You the cop from upstairs?" Malik nodded. "You live below 3F? She nodded back, arms crossed. "You ever hear anything odd from up there? Kids? Arguments?" Her lips pressed together, debating. Then she leaned closer. "Last week I heard crying, like a baby. Then, late at night, someone knocking, but real quiet, like they didn't want to be heard. My husband told me not to get involved. Cops were already here a couple months ago." Malik frowned. "You remember why?" "They said something about suspicious activity, human trafficking or something, but nothing came of it. All went quiet. Then that baby started crying again. That's all I know." She closed the door. Malik stood still for a moment, her words settling into place like pieces of a rotting puzzle. Human trafficking, closed case, crying baby, masked man, something didn't add up. Back upstairs, Ranger paced by the mattress, nose to the ground, tail stiff. Malik checked the kitchen again, opened every drawer, turned over broken bowls, scanned for any kind of paperwork, medical records, mail, anything. He found a school flyer for a food pantry outreach. The corner torn off, date circled in red. Next Tuesday. Someone had been planning to return, or hoped someone else would. Then, tucked beneath the fridge magnet, he found a torn photo. It showed a boy, maybe 8, holding a younger child on his hip, both smiling faintly, standing beside a familiar black and brown German shepherd. The same dog now, watching Malik intently. "Is this them?" he murmured. Ranger's tail thumped once. Malik crouched and held the photo near the dog. "This is you, huh? You were theirs." The shepherd gave a quiet whine, leaned forward, and nudged the photo with his nose. Malik stood, photo in one hand, phone in the other. His chest was tight, thoughts racing. This wasn't just a rescue, this was a message, a trail, a trap, or maybe a second chance. The hallway creaked outside. Someone was watching. He stepped toward the door, senses on high alert, and opened it slowly, just enough to peer through. No one there, but Ranger was already moving, nose in the air, ears twitching. Something was coming, or had just been here. Malik pocketed the photo, checked the old phone one more time, and played the video again. This time, he noticed a detail he'd missed before: the man's left hand. 3 fingers. The ring and pinky were missing, a healed stump beneath the glove. Malik's heart pounded louder now. That detail, that injury. He'd seen it before, in another file, a case long buried. He looked at Ranger. The dog growled again, low and rumbling, as if sensing the same thing Malik did. Whoever had come here wasn't finished, and Malik, he was just getting started. The shelter's hallway was quiet except for the gentle hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The pale linoleum floors creaked as Malik moved down the corridor toward room 108, a borrowed space where they'd set up temporary quarters for the boy and his baby brother. Ranger padded behind him, a quiet shadow at his side, his eyes as sharp as ever, ears flicking at every sound. Malik had barely slept since finding the children. Micah, the baby, was still in the hospital under fluid treatment and observation. But Eli, the older boy, had refused to say a word since the rescue. Not a whisper, not a sound. Just that stillness, the kind that wasn't born from shyness but survival. When Malik entered the room, Eli was perched on the edge of the cot, back straight, hands clasped tightly in his lap. His brown eyes locked on Ranger the moment they entered, and something shifted in his small frame. Not relief, not joy, but recognition. Ranger trotted forward without command, sat in front of the boy and tilted his head, waiting. Eli raised his hands, and then he moved, fingers twitching, tracing shapes in the air with deliberate grace. Malik stopped mid-step. He recognized it instantly: American Sign Language. The boy was signing. Ranger responded with a soft whine, then nudged closer, pressing his head gently into the boy's knee. Eli's face didn't change, but his fingers kept moving. Malik sat in the chair across the room, unsure whether to speak or wait. Something told him to stay silent. He watched as Eli spelled something with small, nervous movements. Malik didn't know enough ASL to translate fully, But he caught one sign repeated 3 times. Then the boy pointed at Ranger, then at himself. "You're safe with him," Malik murmured, almost to himself. "He's your friend." Eli looked up at him finally, his gaze direct, unreadable. He didn't blink, just studied Malik as if trying to measure whether he belonged to the same kind of people who'd hurt them or someone different. "I'm Officer Malik. I'm here to help you, Eli. I found you because of him." He nodded toward Ranger. He never gave up. The boy's eyes flickered toward the shepherd again. He reached for Ranger's ear, brushed his fingers through the fur. It was the first real touch Malik had seen him initiate. Progress, small but real. Malik glanced at the small table near the cot, where a box of crayons and some paper had been placed earlier by the social worker. "Can you draw me something?" he asked, voice gentle. "Anything. Something that might help me understand." Eli didn't respond right away. Then, without a word, he picked up a black crayon and dragged it slowly across the page. His strokes were slow at first, cautious, then faster, harder. Malik watched in silence as the boy drew a tall figure. Long coat, gloves, face blank except for one small circle for an eye, the other eye scratched out and colored silver. Then came the hand. Not a full hand, but a jagged line where fingers should have been. Just 2 short stumps and a squared-off wrist. Malik's chest tightened. "Is that someone you saw?" he asked. Eli gave the faintest nod. Ranger, who had been calm the whole time, suddenly rose to his feet, fur bristling, a low growl humming from deep in his throat. Malik turned toward him. "What is it?" The shepherd stared at the drawing, ears rigid, body tense. He took a step toward the paper, then another, as if confirming what he saw. Malik's brow furrowed. "You know this man?" The dog growled louder. Malik stood, hard pounding. He crossed the room, grabbed his laptop from the bag on the floor, and pulled up a folder, one he hadn't opened in months. Cold cases. Some open, some buried. Among them, files from a trafficking investigation 3 years back. Hollow signal. It had gone dark after a lead witness disappeared. The man believed to be behind it had never been identified. Just a code name in a classified folder. Phantom. Malik flipped through the pages, scrolling until he found the old sketch, a composite drawing made from fragmented testimonies. It showed a man with close-cropped hair, cold expression, and one key detail, a hand missing 2 fingers. He looked at the paper Eli had drawn. It was the same figure, the same crooked wrist, the silver eye. Malik's breath slowed. He turned back to Eli. "Have you seen him before?" Eli gave the tiniest of nods, then turned his face away, curling slightly into himself. Ranger circled once, then pressed his body protectively against the boy's legs. Malik returned to the file. Somewhere in the notes, someone had once described the man's eye as strange, reflective, almost silver-like glass. It was a rare condition, one that had come up in exactly one other case file. Malik clicked open a profile photo from that second file, and froze. The man in the photo wore a uniform, police-issued jacket, clean shave, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name, Marcus Vell, retired early, medical leave, decorated, respected, vanished from duty records after 2018. Malik scanned the photo again, the same silver eye, the same damaged hand. He pulled the image from the screen, turned it toward Eli. "Is this him?" The boy didn't speak, but his hands shot up fast, trembling, fingers forming the sign for danger. The Ranger growled again, this time louder, snarling with his lips pulled back. Eli flinched. Malik lowered the laptop. His pulse thudded in his ears. This wasn't just a coincidence. Ranger knew the man. Eli feared him. And Marcus Vell, whoever he truly was, had left his mark on this boy's life in a way no child should ever carry. Malik pushed back from the desk and stood, his mind whirling. He had seen Vell once, years ago, back when he was still new to the force, before Vell vanished. And now the same ghost from his past stood haunting the shadows of a boy who wouldn't speak but still remembered. Malik's phone buzzed, a message from the precinct. "You requested internal access. Case 7739 has been restricted. Clearance denied." Malik narrowed his eyes. Someone didn't want him digging. But now he had more than suspicion. He had names, he had patterns, he had Ranger-id. He glanced at the dog, who had returned to Eli's side and lay down, head on the boy's foot. The boy sat rigid, but his hand now rested in Ranger's fur, fingers curling around a tuft like it was the only tether to safety he had. Malik took a breath, steadying himself. If Marcus Vell was back, if he had anything to do with what had happened to these boys, then this wasn't just a case anymore. It was a reckoning. He opened a drawer, pulled out his old external drive, and plugged it into his laptop. If the official records wouldn't give him what he needed, maybe the backups he'd kept in secret would. Somewhere in those files there had to be something. The rain had come in heavy that morning, casting everything in Eastfield beneath a cold sheet of gray. Malik stood in the waiting room of Lakeside Veterinary Clinic, arms crossed tight against his chest, watching the clock tick with mechanical indifference. Ranger lay sedated in the back room, the soft thump of a tail occasionally audible beneath the metallic hum of equipment. It had started with nothing more than a precaution. Ranger had been sluggish since yesterday, less alert, appetite fading, and Malik, though he had never owned a dog before, had felt something off. He trusted that instinct. So did Eli. The boy had barely left Ranger's side all night, only relenting when Malik gently promised to bring him back safe. Dr. Chen, a seasoned vet with a military past and a soft spot for retired service dogs, emerged from the back room with a clipboard in one hand and a look that made Malik's stomach. "You found something," she said without preamble. Malik straightened. "What kind of something?" "Not an implant," she clarified, tapping her pen against the sheet. "It's not subcutaneous. It's internal." A small metal capsule lodged in his lower digestive tract. "At first, we thought it was shrapnel or a swallowed tag, but when we scanned it, it pinged, Malik echoed. "Like a tracker?" "No," she said, lowering her voice. "Like a data key." Malik followed her into the back room, where Ranger rested on a padded table, IV drip running smoothly. A monitor beeped in steady rhythm beside him. Dr. Chen handed Malik a small sealed container holding the object they'd retrieved, no larger than a marble smooth metal with no visible markings except for a tiny rectangular port along one edge. "It was wrapped in a biodegradable membrane," she said. "Whoever designed this didn't want it found easily, and they didn't want it destroyed by stomach acid either." Malik stared at the thing, the implications spinning faster than his thoughts could hold. "Can you read it?" She nodded. "I've isolated it from the clinic system. If you want, we can access it in the lab." In the side room, Dr. Chen connected the chip to a secure workstation. A simple folder appeared on screen, no encryption, no password. Malik clicked it open. Inside was a single file, a map rendered in high-resolution satellite imaging. The file traced a path marked in red dots that stretched from the Kinsley Arms building across the river to the industrial outskirts of Eastfield. It ended at a structure labeled only as Redwood Compound. Malik leaned in. "That's abandoned property." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Legally, yeah. But that place still draws power. Utility companies report unusual spikes monthly. Someone's still using it." Malik memorized the map, took photos, and thanked her. As he walked out of the clinic into the wet street, he called the hospital for an update on Micah. The nurse's tone changed when she heard his name. "You've been trying to reach you," she said quickly. "The baby's vitals are stabilizing, but there's something else." At the hospital, Malik was escorted to the pediatric ICU, where Micah slept beneath warming lights, his tiny frame a fragile silhouette against the humming monitors. A young doctor met him beside the crib. "We ran full tox screens out of caution," he said. "The child's been through extreme malnourishment, but that's not the concerning part. There are trace compounds in his bloodstream. Synthetic." Malik's eyes narrowed. "What kind?" The doctor hesitated. He compared the markers to our controlled substance registry. "Closest match is a discontinued experimental nootropic X3D. It was never approved. Trials stopped 5 years ago after a whistleblower reported neurological damage in infants. There's no legal way this compound should still exist, let alone end up in a baby." Malik exhaled slowly, voice low. "Where was it tested?" The doctor pulled out a tablet, tapped quickly, then turned the screen toward him. "This compound came from a series of unlicensed pediatric clinics, tied to a so-called rehabilitation program for neglected children. The media called them volunteer camps, Redfield, Willow Rise, and one more." Malik didn't need to read it. He already knew what name would appear. Redwood compound. His hand tightened on the tablet as the pieces rearranged themselves in his mind. Marcus Vell, the masked man in the video, the withdrawn file on HoloSignal, and now a facility linked to illegal trials on children. He looked down at Micah, the baby's chest rising and falling, so light it barely seemed real. Rage coiled in Malik's gut. Has the sample been reported? The doctor shook his head. Not yet. Protocol says we notify the parent or guardian first, then authorities. Hold off, Malik said firmly. Let me run this to internal affairs myself. Back in the car, Malik drove in silence, windshield wipers clicking rhythmically against the glass. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. Satellite timestamps on the map file range from 2 weeks ago to 72 hours ago. Whatever was happening there, it's recent. Malik stopped outside the shelter. Eli sat curled in the corner of the main room, knees drawn to chest, sketchbook in hand. He looked up the moment Ranger entered, bounding weakly on shaky legs, and rushed forward. The reunion was quiet. No words, no exclamations. Just a tight embrace and the soft sound of fur brushing against worn cotton. Malik sat beside them, watching. Ranger found something, he said softly. Eli's head tilted. Something inside him, Malik continued. A message. A trail. It leads somewhere we have to go. The boy's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for his sketchbook and began to draw again. Malik waited. After a moment, Eli held up the page. A square building, tall, windowless. A single tree in the yard, its trunk red, its limbs bare. Malik felt a shiver run through him. Have you seen this place? Eli nodded. His fingers signed 3 shapes quickly. Bad, cold, no light. Malik swallowed hard. The map burned into his memory. That place, it's called Redwood. I think you and Micah came from there. Eli looked down, then signed one more word. Burn. Malik wasn't sure if it was a wish or a memory, but either way, it told him all he needed. They had to go there. Not later, not with backup, not with permission. Now. The cold bite of night clung to Malik's coat as he returned to the apartment at Kinsley Arms. The rain had stopped, but its residue slicked every surface, reflecting the flicker of the failing hallway lights in twisted glimmers. He hadn't planned on coming back so soon, but Redwood compound loomed heavy in his mind, and he needed every sliver of information before he moved. The apartment remained as he left it, stagnant, still, suspended in its silent story. He moved through the living room carefully, each step deliberate. Ranger padded behind him, a quiet shadow once more, eyes scanning the darkness with the same quiet focus he'd shown the first night. Malik paused near the broken bookshelf, gaze settling on a red plastic object beneath a stack of worn magazines. He reached down, pulled it free. A handheld game console, one of those cheap brands you'd find in bargain bin. Its screen was scratched, buttons stiff, but it powered on with a faint electronic chime. The home screen flickered, showing one saved file labeled EM, audio. Malik selected it. The speaker hissed, then a soft voice emerged. Male, older. Eli, the voice said low and trembling like it had been recorded in a rush. If they come before we're back, you know what to do. Lock the door, keep Micah quiet, and no matter what, the voice cracked. The pause. Then, if they wear uniforms, don't trust them. Not all of them. Some look like helpers, but static surged, cutting off the end. Malik stood frozen, console in hand, a bitter cold rising up his spine. That voice. It wasn't panicked, it was calculated. A goodbye laced with suspicion and fear. Ranger growled low, ears twitching. Malik played the clip again. Don't trust uniforms. The words carried a weight that went beyond fear. They carried history. Mistrust rooted in betrayal. And now it made sense. Eli's silence, his hesitation, his unwillingness to answer even the kindest questions from anyone in uniform. Someone in authority had hurt them, lied, used the badge as camouflage. And the father knew. Malik set the console down carefully, pulled out his notebook, and wrote a quick note to himself to trace any civilian reports filed under the children's family name, if it even existed in the system. Then he moved to the kitchen. Something had tugged at him the last time he was there, something overlooked. He opened the trash can again, not the one up top with diapers and milk cartons, but the one deeper beneath the sink, sealed with an old grocery bag. The The smell hit first, sharp and metallic. He pulled it open and found stained paper towels, a broken plastic container, and a crumpled t-shirt soaked in what looked like dried blood. Malik's chest tightened. Carefully, using gloves, he packed the items into evidence bags. Back at his car, he locked the samples into his mobile case and drove straight to a contact in the forensics lab, Andre, an old friend who owed him more than one favor. 2 hours later, Malik paced the edge of Andre's workbench while the man clicked away on his computer, the soft whir of the analyzer humming in the background. "Okay," Andre finally said, spinning the monitor toward him. "You were right to bring this in. There are 3 distinct blood types in the sample. One's an infant, matches the hospital record for Micah. The other's a child. I'm guessing Eli. The third..." He paused, frowned. "Third isn't in the system. No match in the national database. No local prints, no records." "Age?" Malik asked. "Adult male, O nation. Uncommon. But here's what's weird. The sample contains traces of propanidol." Malik's eyes narrowed. "The sedative?" "Yeah, but not just any version," Andre continued. "This is a military-grade blend. Fast-acting, suppresses memory in high doses. It was pulled from field use 5 years ago after a scandal in North Africa. You think this guy was drugged? The dose in the shirt fibers suggests exposure by transfer. Likely from gloves or spray." Malik ran a hand down his face. "So someone with military access off the grid was in that apartment." Andre nodded grimly. "And left fast. There's trauma blood too. This guy might have been injured." Malik stood motionless, a storm rising inside him. A ghost with no record. A compound linked to black market trials. A child who couldn't speak his fear, and a baby dosed with something outlawed even in wartime. And now, the last puzzle piece: someone had been there. With intent. Not a parent. Not a neighbor. Someone else. Someone who didn't belong. Ranger sat by the door, eyes fixed on Malik as if waiting for his next decision. Malik's mind reeled. Why would someone that dangerous be in the apartment? And why leave without the kids? Unless... Malik grabbed his notebook again, flipping through pages. He stopped at the drawing Eli had made, the man with the silver eye, the missing fingers. What if that wasn't just a memory? What if that man had been back? Recently? If so, the kids weren't just abandoned. They were bait. Someone had left them for a reason. And now Malik, by answering Ranger's silent cry for help, had stepped into that reason's path. He pocketed the lab results, eyes dark with determination. Ranger rose beside him, sensing the shift, tails fake, and someone out there was still watching. It was just after 9 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday when Malik opened his front door and found a woman standing on his porch. Her shoulders stiff beneath a beige trench coat, her eyes glassy but resolute. The sky behind her was overcast, pressing low over the neighborhood with the heavy quiet that usually preceded a storm. Malik studied her face immediately. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Tired eyes, she clutched a laminated folder in both hands, as if rehearsing her next move for days. "Officer Bryant?" she asked, voice soft but too controlled. Malik nodded. "Yes?" "I'm Sarah Collins," she said, forcing a breathless sort of urgency into her tone. "I'm Eli's mother. I've been trying to get through the system for days, but..." She faltered, then extended the folder. "I only just learned my boys were found. Please, I need to see them." Malik didn't take the folder. "You just learned?" I was in treatment," she said quickly. "Out of state. I had no phone access. My partner was supposed to..." Her voice cracked then, perfectly timed. Malik watched her carefully, letting the silence stretch. Ranger appeared behind him in the doorway, his body tense, ears back. The shepherd's eyes locked on the woman with an unreadable intensity. "Where have you been for the last 6 months?" Malik asked flatly. "Not on any missing persons list, not in contact with the hospital, not a single check-in with social services. Like I said," she repeated, "rehab. The father, he wasn't stable." Malik kept his expression still. "What's Eli's favorite toy?" The woman blinked. "What?" "His favorite toy," Malik repeated. "You're his mother, you'd know." "He's 8, she said cautiously, eyes flicking to the hallway inside. "Kids that age change so much." "He doesn't..." "The one with the chipped helmet." She didn't respond. He stepped back. "Come inside." Ranger growled as she entered, the sound low and guarded. Malik didn't stop him. In the living room, Eli sat cross-legged on the rug beside Ranger's bed, sorting puzzle pieces with quiet focus. He looked up when they entered, immediately stilling. His eyes flicked to Malik, then to the woman. She dropped to her knees, opening her arms. "Baby, it's me." He didn't move, didn't blink. He looked down at Ranger, who stepped forward between them and planted himself at the boy's side. Eli's hand rose and signed something quickly. Malik caught it. "No." Then Eli's voice, soft but clear. "That's not her." The woman froze. "Eli," she tried. "If he has a birthmark, where is it?" She hesitated. Her jaw clenched. "It's on his ankle." "Wrong," Malik said. "It's at the base of his neck. You didn't know that because you've never seen it. Because you're not his mother." Her face changed then. The warmth dissolved. What remained was cold steel beneath soft fabric. She stood slowly, eyes sharp. "You're making a mistake." "Am I?" Malik said, stepping between her and Eli. "Let's find out." 2 hours later, Malik sat behind his desk, laptop open to a secured background check request. The name Sarah Collins had returned almost nothing until he dug deeper. Her real name wasn't Sarah. It was Marla Keene, and she had once worked as a case manager at a federally funded youth rehabilitation program called the Arbor Project, one of 3 volunteer shelters shut down during a federal sting involving human trafficking, off-book medical testing, and false adoption records. Malik read the archived reports slowly, his hand curling into a fist. Keene had walked away from the investigation with 0 charges. Her testimony had been sealed, her employment history sanitized. Now she was back, showing up on his doorstep with forged credentials, playing a role. Malik leaned back in his chair, staring at her photo from 10 years prior, same sharp cheekbones, same calculating stare. She had been involved in the intake of children from low-income neighborhoods, children deemed unfit by falsified behavioral reports, children like Eli and Micah. A knock at his door pulled him back. Eli stood there, quiet as ever, holding his sketchbook to his chest. Malik gestured him in, nodding toward the couch. "You okay?" he asked. Eli nodded, then sat. He opened his book to a fresh page and began drawing. Malik returned to his laptop, starting a new file. Subject: Marla Keene, alias Sarah Collins. Priority: immediate watch list. "She won't come back," Malik said after a moment, not looking up. "But we need to be careful now. She was part of something dangerous." Eli paused his drawing, then scribbled something in the corner. He turned the book to show Malik. It was a picture of a tree. Not just any tree, thin, with twisted limbs, roots crawling over cement. A red mark slashed across the bark like a wound. At the base stood a figure, faceless, but familiar. Malik's throat went dry. Eli nodded. Then slowly, deliberately, signed one word: Redwood. Malik looked from the drawing to the boy, then to Ranger, who sat alert beside them, eyes locked on the door, as if already sensing what came next. The wind outside groaned against the eaves of Malik's house, the old wood creaking as the night deepened into silence. It was past midnight. The house had settled into a hush, the kind of quiet only found in neighborhoods where people trusted their locks and their fences. Upstairs, Micah stirred softly in his crib, the faint glow of a rocket-shaded nightlight casting long shadows across the nursery walls. Downstairs, Malik sat at the kitchen table with a case file open in front of him and a cup of cold coffee forgotten by his hand. Ranger lay curled at Eli's bedroom doorway, his ears occasionally twitching as if dreaming. Malik had spent the last 2 hours combing through archived task force data with every clearance level he still had access to, chasing the trail left by Marla Keene and the Redwood compound. But the deeper he went, the more everything felt scrubbed, sanitized, names missing, links broken, like someone had reached into the guts of the system and pulled out anything that could tie it together. He tapped his fingers against the table, then clicked into a restricted personnel log from a former federal canine division tagged Task Group Polaris, a name he hadn't seen since he was fresh out of the academy. As he typed, a file flashed briefly behind a login prompt. It wasn't locked behind clearance, it was locked behind deletion. And that told him one thing: whatever it contained, someone didn't just want it hidden, they wanted it erased. Ranger suddenly growled, low, sharp, Not in sleep, Malik stood immediately. The house was still, but Ranger was on his feet now, body stiff, ears pointed to the back door. Malik moved silently, hand resting on the grip of his holstered sidearm, stepping lightly past the couch. Then he heard it. A faint click. The unmistakable slide of a window unlocking. In one smooth motion, he pulled his weapon and flicked off the safety. Ranger moved in sync, positioning himself near the hallway, blocking Eli and Micah's rooms from reach. Malik reached the back door and crouched, peering around the edge. A shadow moved against the far wall, tall, fast, methodical. The silhouette didn't head for the electronics, didn't check drawers. It moved toward the corner where Ranger's leash and service vest were hung. Malik's voice cut through the room like a blade. Back, step back, hands where I can see them. The intruder froze, for a second, then bolted toward the sliding door. Ranger leapt before Malik could shout, body crashing into the man's legs and sending him sprawling across the floor. Malik closed the gap in 2 strides and pinned the figure down, wrenching back one arm and cuffing it in one fluid motion. The second arm resisted. Gloved, strong, Malik forced it back and finally turned the intruder over. The man wore a black tactical jacket, no insignia, night vision goggles, a tactical earpiece now knocked loose. Malik yanked the mask off. The man's face was rough, scarred, unfamiliar. His eyes darted around, calculating. He wasn't here to steal. He was here for Ranger. Your federal? Malik demanded. No answer. The man's jaw clenched. Malik grabbed the phone clipped to his belt. No passcode. He opened it and found only one open app, Tracker Sync. A live ping centered on his house with a tag labeled Asset Urchinless Public Den. Ranger. Malik stepped back, heart thundering. He'd seen that prefix before. Not on civilian dogs, not even standard canine units. It was part of a black-level registry used exclusively for embedded operations, specifically in trafficking investigations. Ranger wasn't just a retired Polaris. Malik dragged the man upright and shoved him into a chair. Who sent you? Malik glanced at Ranger, who now stood stiff-legged, hackles raised, teeth bared, then back at the phone. He dove into the settings. Last sync date, 38 hours ago. From a command node registered to a name, Elter Daniel Croy. The air left Malik's lungs. Daniel Croy, a name he hadn't spoken in years. Croy had once been his superior officer in Eastfield's Special Investigations Unit. The same man who had derailed Malik's promotion and pushed him out after a confrontation involving racial profiling on an operation that went sideways. Croy had filed the paperwork that got Malik reassigned and blacklisted from anything above patrol work. But more than that, Croy had led the Polaris division. If Ranger had come from that program, and someone like Croy had marked him as recoverable, then the dog had never truly been retired. He had gone missing, or worse, gone rogue. Malik opened his own laptop and ran a deeper scan using the data embedded in the intruder's phone. A file popped up, Asset R147 asked to go. Handler D. Croy terminated. Malik's jaw clenched. Someone had declared Ranger dead, buried the file, written him off. But he wasn't dead. He had survived, disappeared, found Eli and Micah, protected them, and now they were trying to reclaim him. Not for justice, for silence. Malik's hand hovered over the keyboard. If Croy was still operating off the books, still running assets, then the Redwood compound wasn't a ghost. It was active, funded, and protected. Behind him, Eli stood in the hallway now, quiet, holding Malik's and waited. Ranger moved beside the boy, body pressed close. Malik knelt to Eli's level. Someone tried to take him tonight, he said calmly, but they didn't. And they won't. Eli looked down at Ranger, then back at Malik, and signed something slow, deliberate. Malik recognized it from memory. They're scared of him. Then another. He remembers. Malik's phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. The text was short. You should have stayed gone, Bryant. Malik stared at it, his mind racing, pulse steady now. If Croy was watching, then so were others. And the game he thought he'd walked away from had never ended. It had only gone deeper underground. He turned to the still silent intruder, who now watched him with unreadable eyes, the edges of a cruel smile twitching across his face. Malik knew what that look meant. This wasn't the last visit. It was just the warning shot. The dawn broke heavy with fog as Malik zipped up his tactical jacket and loaded the last of his gear into the back of his SUV. The cold sat low in his lungs as he stepped into the driveway, eyes narrowing at the figure pacing in slow, tight circles near the gate. Ranger. The dog hadn't slept since the break-in. He'd refused food, ignored Eli's coaxing, and had remained by the window all night. Body tense, ears flicking at every movement. Something had switched inside him. Not fear focus. Purpose. Malik opened the back hatch and looked at him. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Ranger jumped in without hesitation. The drive out of Eastfield was silent, both of them locked into a rhythm of thought shaped by years of discipline. One man, one dog, tracking ghosts neither of them had been allowed to speak of. Malik followed the GPS data pulled from the intruder's phone and overlaid it with the route hidden in the chip Dr. Chin had extracted from Ranger's body. They matched perfectly, same location, same coordinates, deep in the industrial graveyards at the edge of the county, where factories had rotted away and no one dared to patrol. By the time Malik turned off the main road onto the gravel path, the sun had burned through only enough fog to make the trees look like they were retreating. The compound rose out of the mist like a forgotten bunker. 3 concrete buildings surrounded by rusting wire fence. A weather-worn sign that once read Redwood Youth Center, now nearly blank with age. Ranger stood against the door the moment the engine cut. Malik scanned the area with a cautious sweep before stepping out. "Stay tight," he whispered. Together they moved to the gate. Malik cut the old chain and slipped inside. The main building's entrance stood ajar, hinges broken, the inside choked with mildew and the stench of abandonment. Ranger moved ahead, nose low, tail frozen, each paw step careful but certain. Down the hall they passed empty rooms, beds overturned, drawers scattered, old children's shoes left behind like artifacts in a forgotten war. Then Ranger stopped in front of a steel door half opened, barked once, and slipped through. Malik followed. The room was dark except for slits of sunlight creeping in through boarded windows. The walls were lined with broken monitors, cracked keyboards, stacks of tapes and drives spilling from rusted cabinets. Against the far wall stood 2 rust-stained bunk beds, frames bent, mattresses torn. Malik's breath caught. Someone had painted the concrete wall beside the bottom bunk, a child's painting, crooked and layered in colors that had faded with time. A stick figure, holding another smaller one, and beside them a 4-legged shape, its ears too big for its body. Ranger stepped up to the wall and let out a low, breathy whine. "Ellie," Malik whispered. The drawings weren't recent. The lines trembled as if drawn by a child trying not to cry, trying not to make a sound. Malik turned slowly, eyes scanning the shelves. He moved to the desk at the back of the room, lifted a shattered camera from its mount. The lens was cracked, its housing charred, but the body still held a memory slot. He pulled the card and slipped it into his portable reader. The tablet screen came to life. One video, time-stamped 8 months ago. He played it. The footage was jittery, shot from a wall mount angle facing the far end of the room. A child, Eli, sat curled in a corner, arms around something bundled in cloth. Micah. A door slammed off screen. The boy flinched. A man entered, tall-gloved, dragging something behind him. Then suddenly, a blur. From the side of the frame, Ranger burst in, crashing into the man with full force, teeth clamped on the arm holding a baton. The child screamed. The image shook violently. The man fell backward. Ranger didn't let go. In the chaos, Eli crawled toward the door. Micah pressed against his chest. Ranger lunged again, driving the man to the ground, then turned and looked straight into the camera, and bolted after the children. The footage ended there. Malik stared at the screen, heart hammering. "You got them out," he whispered. "You weren't lost, you were leading them." Ranger stood still, staring at the monitor, as if reliving every second. Malik turned the card over in his hand. "You tried to erase this," he said. "They thought if they declared you dead, it would end the story. But you remembered. You came back." He searched the rest of the room, scanning through old files, printouts, fragments of names and initials. Most had been shredded or burned, but one folder remained intact in a cabinet beneath a false door. Inside were logs, intake records, coded numbers beside names, some crossed out, some labeled transferred, And then, Subject R147 Guardian Override triggered, status loose, contingency activated. Malik narrowed his eyes. Contingency. They'd planned for Ranger's escape. They knew he might resist, might protect. Malik scanned the rest of the log. A signature at the bottom, the same shadow, and beside it, a list of flagged locations. Safe houses, transfer stations, disposal zone. Redwood was only the beginning. The paperwork sat heavy in Malik's hands as he stood outside the courthouse, the afternoon wind tugging at the edge of the manila envelope like it wanted to pull it away. Inside were the adoption forms, neatly filled, backed by letters of recommendation, including one from Micah's attending physician and two from social workers who had witnessed the transformation inside Malik's home. He had included photos too. Eli helping Lucas build blocks in the living room, Micah giggling in the high chair, and Ranger pressed between the boys like an old sentinel made of flesh and loyalty. He had filled the forms with hope and resolve. When the call came the next morning, it didn't take long to break both. "Mr. Bryant," the voice over the line said, clipped and bureaucratic, "we've received your request, but due to an ongoing federal investigation involving both minors, your petition is being put on indefinite hold. You are not an eligible guardian at this time." "On what grounds?" Malik asked, his voice sharper than he meant it to be. "I've passed every clearance. I've provided stable housing, income, references." "This isn't about your qualifications, sir," the woman said. "It's about exposure. These children may be connected to an open case involving multiple federal jurisdictions. Until we determine the extent of their involvement and their biological parent status, they must remain under state supervision." "They don't have anyone else," Malik said. Silence on the other end. "Then, we appreciate your but this is out of our hands." The line went dead. Malik sat at the edge of his bed for a long time afterward, hands slack in his lap, the silence in the room stretching like a wound. Downstairs, the boys played quietly, Lucas with wooden blocks, Eli drawing, Ranger snoring lightly at their feet. That evening, Malik didn't say anything about the call. Instead, he made dinner like always, cutting Micah's vegetables into tiny cubes, setting Eli's juice beside his plate without asking what flavor he wanted, because he already knew. The table was warm with small laughter and clinking spoons. But Malik felt the clock ticking in every moment. After they ate, he helped Eli finish homework, then read to Micah until the baby fell asleep with a fist curled around the edge of Malik's sleeve. Later, as he turned off the light in the boys' room, he found Eli still awake, eyes open in the dark. Malik knelt beside his bed. "You good?" he asked softly. Eli nodded once. Then, after a pause, whispered, "You're the only one that did." Malik didn't know what to say at first. He reached up and brushed a hand over Eli's hair. "I'm not going anywhere, kid, no matter what they say." Eli nodded again, but his hand slid quietly from beneath the blanket and rested on Ranger's back, as if anchoring himself just in case Malik was wrong. The next morning, a package arrived. No return address. Just a small brown envelope tucked inside the mailbox without a stamp. Malik opened it on the porch. Inside was a photograph, faded, matte finish, folded once down the middle. It showed Ranger, younger but unmistakable, fur darker, posture even more rigid than now. He wore his canine vest. Beside him stood a tall man in plain clothes, military cut, dark skin, sunglasses hiding his eyes. One hand rested gently on Ranger's neck. Malik stared at it, breath locked in his throat. He recognized the man, not from service. From a drawing, Eli had sketched him once in his notebook, not as a warning, but as memory. "Dad," he had written under it in shaky letters. Malik flipped the photo over. On the back, scrawled in ink that had bled slightly from moisture, were 4 words. He knew too much. Malik felt the weight of them, heavy, final. A sentence and a verdict. He took the photo inside, showed it to Eli without saying anything. The boy's fingers curled slowly around the edge. He stared at it for a long time, silent. Ranger moved closer, head brushing Eli's knee. "That was him," Eli said softly. "He told me to be brave. He said Ranger would come if he couldn't." Malik nodded, swallowing past the tightness in his throat. "He was part of it," he murmured. "He saw too much, and they made sure he disappeared. But he didn't." Malik looked at the dog, who now stood completely still, gaze fixed not on the photo but on the boy. Ranger remembered. All of it. And so did Eli. Malik stood slowly, hand closing around the edge of the envelope again. Someone had sent this to warn him, or to threaten, but they had underestimated something. These kids weren't evidence. They were witnesses, and maybe, just maybe, they were the only leverage he had left. He looked down at the photo one last time, the words echoing. He knew too much. Malik understood now, so did. The cold wind swept over the courthouse steps as Malik stood outside with Eli's hand tucked in his. Micah bundled against his chest beneath the thick folds of a navy peacoat. Snow threatened above them, clouds gathering like a slow drumroll over the city. For 3 weeks, Malik had fought through walls of red tape, relentless interviews, and scrutiny from people who didn't know the first thing about trust, about silence, about what it meant to stand between broken children and a system too slow to reach them. But something had shifted after the envelope arrived, after the photo of Eli's father with Ranger had made its way into evidence and sparked questions in all the right places. Suddenly, files reopened. Suddenly, names unredacted. Ranger was no longer a ghost. He was proof. And proof combined with loyalty and timing had given the court just enough reason to consider the unthinkable. That afternoon, Judge Helen Morano, a silver-haired woman with eyes that had clearly seen too much, called the hearing to order in a chamber smaller than Malik expected. Eli sat beside him, a little too stiff in his buttoned shirt, hair combed but still slightly rebellious, as if it had made its own decision to fight authority. Ranger lay curled at their feet, unmoving but awake, head raised just enough to keep Eli's sneaker in his line of sight. Micah sat with a social worker in the front row, guggling quietly, blinking up at the golden chandeliers as if they were stars in a warm night. "Mr. Bryant," the judge said, voice clear and formal, "you are petitioning for full guardianship and legal adoption of Eli and Micah Henderson. The court has reviewed your case, your history, and the unique circumstances under which these minors entered your care. Due to extraordinary factors, including the protective actions taken on behalf of these children and the urgency of their situation, I have been granted discretion to approve this request." Malik's throat tightened. He nodded once, firm but silent. Then the judge turned to Eli. "Eli," she said gently, folding her hands on the bench, "you are old enough that the court must ask for your consent. Do you understand what adoption means?" Eli didn't answer at first. His hand tightened around Malik's. Then, slowly, he stood. He didn't look at the judge. He looked down at Ranger, who blinked up at him with that steady, watchful calm. Then Eli turned to Malik, searched his eyes, and nodded once. "Yes," he said, voice soft but certain. "He's our family now." The words hung in the room like a candle lit in the dark. The judge smiled, small and slow. "So noted." The sound of the gavel was quiet, but in Malik's chest it echoed like a thunderclap. The ride home was quiet. Eli sat in the back seat, one hand resting on Ranger's shoulder, the other pressed against the window, drawing invisible patterns in the glass fogged by his breath. Micah slept soundly in his carrier. Malik drove through the slow swirl of early snow, headlights catching flakes like fireflies frozen midair. When they reached the house, Malik unlocked the front door, turned on the porch light, and stepped aside as Ranger trotted in first, tail sweeping wide as he checked each room like he always did, an old instinct that hadn't dulled, even with safety found. The boys followed, Eli taking off his coat and hanging it on the same hook he had refused to use for weeks. Micah squealed when the heater clicked on, the house filled with warmth, the smell of cinnamon from the plug-in diffuser Malik had started using, and the faint echo of laughter drifting from the television in the other room. Dinner was leftover stew and grilled cheese, Eli's favorite. Malik didn't say much. He didn't need to. The air had shifted. The silence was no longer laced with fear or tension. It was peace. When bedtime came, Micah was out like a light, one fist curled beneath his chin, the other grasping the edge of his blanket like a lifeline. Malik tucked him in, adjusted the mobile above the crib, then crossed the hallway to check on Eli. The boy sat on his bed, cross-legged, reading the same worn comic book he always chose on quiet nights. Ranger lay at the foot of the bed, tail tapping the sheets once every few seconds like a heartbeat. Malik leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching them. "Need anything?" he asked. L.A. looked up, hesitated, then shook his head. Malik stepped into the room, reached down to adjust the corner of the blanket, then turned to leave. Just as he reached the threshold, Eli's voice stopped him. "Dad?" It was the softest word Malik had ever heard. A tremor wrapped in hope. Malik turned slowly, eyes wide. Eli didn't look up from his blanket. He just smiled to himself, a tiny private smile, and nestled down beneath the covers. Malik crossed the room again, knelt by the bed, and laid a hand over the boy's. He was already drifting off, fingers curled gently into the sheets, body relaxed in a way Malik had never seen before. Ranger lifted his head, glanced at Malik, then laid it back down against Eli's ankle with a long, contented sigh. Outside the window, snow began to fall in earnest, flakes thick and slow, layering the world in silence. Malik stood there a while, watching them sleep. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The war hadn't ended. The shadows still lingered beyond the edge of town, and names like Daniel Croy and Marla Keene still stained the system like oil on concrete. But in that house, in that moment, there was no room for fear. Only warmth, only breath, only the soft hush of snow against the window, and the sound of a boy who no longer trembled in the dark. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss what comes next. I'd love to hear what part of the story hit you the hardest. Was it the moment Eli said, "He's our family now," or when Ranger's past came to light? And where in the world are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, and let's talk.